let me thank all of you so much for being a part of today's conversation. I am so very happy that all of you have chosen to spend the next hour with us. And today we're going to talk about the lexicon of leaders and what the significance is of the words that we choose. Now, all of you probably know that words are more powerful than you can even imagine. So it's incredibly important to choose them wisely. Why? Because words are a means for us to express and describe our experiences to others. And they always have emotion attached to them. Our feelings are constantly creating our lives. And the words we use, especially when chosen repeatedly, can actually deepen our feelings and ultimately become our experience. Today, Terry is going to share with you a wealth of knowledge as an author, a speaker, a professionally certified coach. And she's someone who is absolutely passionate about creating individual learning paths to enhance leaders' brilliance and elevate their contribution. Her company, ShortGroup, provides live and online learning opportunities for individuals and groups. And in 2020, she published a phenomenal book that I've had the privilege of reading, and it's called The Words We Choose, Your Guide to How and Why Words Matter. It was, get this, awarded a 2020 American BookFest Finalist, and she's been interviewed for various mediums, including Fast Company, NPR, and New York Times, because of the incredible impact she has on this topic. Today, you're going to be able to learn strategies for how we manage our internal voice to serve us well and help us reach our greatest potential. And of particular interest is how we can change our perspective by changing our words. So with that, let me introduce to you Terry Short.
Gosh, that's quite the introduction. I have to make one correction. Not yet the New York Times. It was NPR in New York, but we're still working towards that, right?
Got it. All right. I love that. Thank you so much, Terry. I appreciate that. So let me just ask, you've been on a journey to get to this place where you have this incredible insight around the world's words we use. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what's led you to have such passion around helping people choose the words that they choose more carefully and explaining to others how and why words matter?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm very humbled and honored to be a part of this group. I'm looking at all the names and all the powerful women that have joined today. And I appreciate you showing up to participate in this dialogue, because Linda and I are going to ask a few questions too. So when I have been a leader along the way in healthcare, in hospitality, I started to have a sensitivity. I've always been very customer focused. So Four Seasons hotels, and then in healthcare, my responsibility was for improving the patient experience. And so I started to really develop my what I heard, my listening skills to hearing exactly the words people chose. And I would oftentimes think, whoa, is that what they really meant? Whether it was a physician speaking to a patient, or it was a leader speaking to the team, I would think to myself, gosh, just changing up that one word would have such a greater impact. So and I would pay attention to that myself. I used to tease that I'd say, and you, as leaders, you've all done this. You express something to your team, you come back a month later, and there's some confusion about it. And I would always say, I may have said that in Portuguese the first time. So I started to think, I need to own that. I need to own those word choices that will be most impactful. And that's what eventually led me to write the book.
I love that. And, in the book, you talk about the words that leaders use and those that they should abandon altogether. You note that there are some words that should be replaced, and that practicing the pause is the ticket to becoming more inspirational and influential as a leader. We all have habits, and even the words we choose can be habitual and not necessarily aligned with our intentions. And 2021 may just be the year that we all look a little bit more closely at how we communicate. In fact, even the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, said in a recent New York Times article that words matter, and that she and that administration would be giving a priority to word choice moving forward. So listening in and learning keywords for your leadership lexicon is really important, I think. So talk a little bit about the words that leaders should abandon altogether, the ones that should be replaced.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm going to start with it because I believe this is a reflection of 2020 and what everybody went through. I see an emergence of the use of if a lot, and it's natural. If we get to travel again, if we return to the workplace, right? Changing that to when makes a huge difference. If you're speaking to your team, you're speaking to your spouse, when we get to travel again, you're asserting in a very positive, forward-thinking manner that there is hope that that will happen. So you're, as a leader, let's say, when you'll say, when we return to the workplace, or perhaps that's not going to happen. You might say, when we fill these additional positions that we have open, as opposed to if we fill them. The choice to use if actually forces the doubt. It forces doubt and ambiguity that doesn't serve anyone well. So I contend that that's a place to start on the heels of 2020 to think about every time you start to say if, the opportunity to change that up to when this happens. And along those same lines with the sort of the switch out that you were asking about would be but and end. So that's a hot one. And I find that, particularly women, I believe are more sensitive to the but. And Marshall Rosenberg famously said, keep your butt out of it. And what he meant by that was there's a way to converse without ever offering but. Or however. However is, I've heard this said before, is but in a tuxedo. You're talking along and you say, however, might as well be saying but. So it's the challenge is to challenge yourself. I challenge all of you right here and now today to switch every time you go to say but, to pause, practice the pause and replace it with end. So let's talk a little bit about that in a challenging way in business. You might be thinking, right, but we don't have enough resources to do that. Sometimes that's what your immediate response is. So changing that up to, and this will give us an opportunity to look at the additional resources we need.
Yeah, that I think is so smart. And I love that example around practicing the pause. And practicing the pause, as you've said, is really the ticket to being more inspirational and more influential as a leader. So can you give a couple examples of where leaders have used practicing the pause really effectively?
Absolutely. So I have endless examples, but I'll start with what I hear a lot as a coach. I hear a lot of people talking about their 10 minutes of fame to explain something to the senior team or to explain something to their team. And so I'm a huge proponent of you practice the pause when you're setting up exactly the message that you want to deliver, and that you're pausing long enough to noodle on exactly what outcome you desire. And when you center yourself there, you'll start to then tease out exactly what needs to be said to get you to that outcome, possibly what needs to be asked to get you to that outcome. And then you're in a listening position, which is important as well. So starting with an example like that of you might be going into a meeting with 12 other executives, or you might be going into a meeting with just one other person. What is your intention? What is your desired outcome from that conversation? And when you pause long enough to consider that, then you'll be ready to choose words that are affirmative, are steeped with ownership and your own accountability of the messaging.
That's such great advice. I love that. And Terre, in your book, you talk about a journey that begins with looking inward, almost like a personal podcast, and how word choice can deepen your connection with loved ones, with colleagues, with customers, and with others. So can you explain a little bit what you mean by a personal podcast. Just expand on that idea a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny, Linda, in the last couple of weeks, I've been using this quite a bit with my children. They're in their early 20s and they're constantly have the headset on and they're listening to podcasts. And then we get in a conversation about a challenge that they're having. And so what I'm propose is that you are the director, the producer, the narrator, the host of your personal podcast on a daily basis. Like, you're in control of what you're listening to, and that all hinges on the words you choose. If you're choosing words that are limiting to yourself, minimizing to yourself, or you're choosing to allow somebody else onto your personal podcast, maybe it's your mother, maybe it's a boss or an ex-boss, maybe it's somebody that you're choosing to hear the words that they're offering or they've offered you in the past. You don't have to. It's the first chapter because it's step one. Step one is taking control of that narrative, and therefore, in doing so, elevating your sense of self. It's a very conscious decision. It's a very proactive way to go about your day. And then that practice, the pause starts there, is what pause long enough to consider the narrative that will play on your personal podcast today, this week, next month, and how you will reclaim, let's say, control of that narrative.
That's great. Let's talk about minimizing or limiting messages that you may be hearing on your personal podcast. So what words do you see that people use that send a message of minimizing or limiting the importance or the value of what's being communicated?
Again, endless amount of those words, but I'm going to give you some of the top ones. Just. I hear people qualify what they're saying with just so often, and it might be just something about themselves. I'm just the administrative assistant, or it might be about an action. I just wanted to share an update on our team's progress. All right, well, take away just, and I would like to share an update on our team's progress. Much more assertive and affirmative, much more ownership of that message. So just is, write it down, tear it up, throw it away. There's no place for that anymore, right? I give the example sometimes of I'm just the administrative assistant. And when I've heard people say that in the past, I imagine a bubble above their head. And in the bubble, there are things like, none of these people would get to their meetings on time, and no work would actually get done unless I did this, and I juggle all these balls, and they would all be on the floor. So there's a lot going on there. And somehow the person chooses to minimize themselves by adding just. Serves no true purpose for the individual or for the others. The other words along the kind of a different line, they all go in the same bucket for me, are words like should and might. I might do something. Well, why am I hedging? Own it. I will do something. Why would I minimize my effort, my contribution? I should. When I say I should, I'm implying that someone else has a little bit more control or has some control over this decision, or there's something else, or society in general is forcing me or is leading me to that place. And that doesn't have to be the case. I will. I'm choosing that position. And so thinking about when you insert those words, you're also choosing that. You're choosing the doubt. You're choosing the lack of ownership, let's say. So it can be very powerful, and it can be very inspiring from a leadership perspective to pause long enough to change up those words. And maybe you're going to, like I like to say, you can't unsee the list. And so you'll think about the ones that are more prevalent, let's say, in your lexicon, and you can't change everything at once. So start with which ones you think you say the most, and then change them up and reflect on conversations. Like, at the end, like I'll reflect on this conversation afterwards and think, how could I have done better? What other word choices would I have had? And that's what I mean by have that reflection to up your game every time.
Yeah, so smart, Terry, to be reflective in that way. And I'd like to open it up to everyone on the call. If you don't mind unmuting yourself, let's have just a quick conversation. What words do you hear, or what words do you know that you say that might send a minimizing or limiting message? Patty, you had a really good example in the chat, and you said the word only.
Only. I am only a admin assistant. I am only a program manager. I am only. That diminishes you as well. It's just, to me, it's just and only kind of go together.
Yep.
Yeah. Really good example. What about others? Are there ways where you have felt diminished or minimized, or the value that you've provided have been in some way dismissed based on the words that you heard?
I think one of the things that I've used is, can I bother you for a moment?
Oh.
No.
Yeah.
Because that assumes you're a bother and you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Or I really feel, ladies, when people say, can I pick your brain? And I don't like that. I feel it feels very invasive. So I say, I've earned this institutional knowledge and intellectual property, but you can glean some best practices from me. And I
like
correct
that.
my team and the guys I lead. I'm a Navy captain, and I correct all the guys I lead and general officers as well, and men in general, because I think it's a patriarchy term.
Yeah. There's something that leaders sometimes say that's happening right now, and it is using the word when. But what leaders are sometimes saying is, when we get back to work. What the employee is hearing is, idiot, what do you think I've been doing the last 18 months where I've been working my tail off on Zoom calls back to back? I'm at home homeschooling. And oh, by the way, I've been trapped in the same house with the same people for 18 months. What do you think I've been doing? So it does use the word when better than if, but just say things like, when we get back to the workplace.
Patty, what you're making me think of, I have this list of what I call clarity killers. And clarity killers can be vague words. They can be vague phrases like that. So there's a serious lack of clarity. And then that doesn't serve the speaker's intent. So being mindful of what those clarity killers are is incredibly important too.
I have a question. I'm not a native English speaker, and obviously I do some mistakes. But what I noticed now, listening to all you ladies, native speakers, looks to me that actually, classic English, I'm from Canada, and we have a little bit maybe different lexicon, which now close to American. But actual, polite British lexicon now became, I would say, more democratic, and all this would, should, can I, all this polite, not all, but many of these polite parts of the sentence now kind of to be switched to more assertive one. Is it correct?
Yes. Yeah. If I'm understanding you properly, that again, I think this sometimes women might err a little bit more on in this vein than men in not wanting to be definitive, wanting to, in a way, leaving space for everyone else, in our natural leave space for everyone, where we don't narrow in and say will as opposed to should and can do this. And so we don't lead with that assertion oftentimes. So it's what I think you're saying, Emily, is that there's also a bit of a politeness about it
that you are losing. So when I was learning English years ago, in a textbook, it was not written for men or for women. It was kind of style, and actually business style of, communication and letters, which was involving this kind of polite, would, should, based on circumstances, words. What I see now, it's actually, let's forget this British, monarchy style, and let's be kind of to the point. And it's kind of changing the language format for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting thought there. And Sherry, I love what you just said in chat, that you use just too much, and it's creating awareness of that. You even use it in emails. So this is helpful already. Thank you, my friend. So what else, ladies? Is there anything else that you think you do that minimizes who you are and what you offer. Jennifer, I also think of you. Is there anything you've learned through your leadership where you recognize that, perhaps you've been minimized or dismissed based on word choice?
For me, it's been the word just, because I hear conversations going on in my head, and I would say I'm just the ... Or I've learned through other scenarios, I actually use the word may I versus can I when I'm asking a question, because it sounds a little more polite and more genuine than saying can I. That's when I would ask for stuff. So, and the word and
I think too, one of the mistakes women make many times is we say too much. We put too many words in too many adjectives. I know when I wrote my first book, it was probably 60, 70, 80,000 words. When it came back from my editor and publisher, it was like 45, 50,000 words, because I put all these adjectives and all these extra words in there. So we tend to say too much. The other thing I hear is sometimes leaders using, I call them Dilbert words or Dilbert sayings, like this isn't rocket science. What people hear when you say that is you've just called them stupid. Right. Or, this is child's play. Well, now you've called them childish. Right. So especially as leaders, being so careful of the words and not using these Dilbert words. I mean, now the new word is pivot. How did you pivot? Or I want to pick your brain, or sales probe questions. I'm thinking of somebody with a, instrument probing into my brain. So just being conscious of those words too, I think is really important as a leader.
And Ro, I love what you said in chat too. We say sorry even when it's not needed. And I think everybody is guilty of that. So Terre, it sounds like the words you choose will have a profound effect on life experience, right? We've just talked about that. And so once you know and understand this connection between your heart and your words, you have the power to live a more intentional, perhaps a more fulfilled life, one that's filled with more joy, more abundance. But what about those times when you need to confront someone, when you need to verbalize a concern or discuss a negative situation? How can you do that with intentionality and purpose, but build the relationship rather than tear it down?
No, it's a great question. And I have to say, since I wrote the book, I did a 9-day intensive through the Center for Nonviolent Communication. I don't know, show of hands of anybody who's heard about that. Okay, Karen. So I did this intensive, and when I revise the book, I will use the vernacular. So the interesting thing is I did the intensive because I felt very aligned to how to have a difficult conversation, and that what I put in the book is aligned with that, but I wanted to go deeper and understand it deeper. So basically, the premise is that when we're entering a conversation, and this is what I say in the book, first, the pause part that happens first is, why do you even think it's a difficult conversation? Where is that coming from? So I call them alleged difficult conversations. Because am I deeming it difficult because I have a lack of knowledge or a lack of experience? I simply do not like conflict. Is it me? Do I own the difficultness of this conversation? Or am I making assumptions about the other person? Am I judging? So there's a whole laundry list of things to unpack before you get to the conversation. And then that's where the Center for Nonviolent Communication, and all of you can go on to their, it's the cnvc.org, and they have fabulous materials to work through the 4 things. Speaking about, you're in this conversation where there might be conflict, straight up speaking about what you observe, what you have witnessed, and then how that makes you feel. So you're owning your feeling, and you're actually stating a feeling, not that I feel it's wrong to do this. I feel frustrated when this happens, right? So you're stating a feeling, you're stating your need of, what it is exactly that you need in this conversation and in this potential conflict. And then you're you're establishing what right looks like for you. So you're making a request. So the last piece is to make a request of going forward. So it's really quite a nice package, if you will, of how to frame the conversation. And the more you do it, the more you use that framework, it's second nature to move through a conversation that you may have established in your head as potentially difficult. So again, to recap, start there. Start with the assessment of why are you perceiving it's difficult in the first place? And what do you need to do about that? What part of that do you own potentially before you even enter it? And then back to what I said, probably the very first question you asked me, Linda, is then establish what your intention is. What is your intention for this conversation? What's your desired outcome? Then you follow the framework. And it's really, that's why frameworks are around, so that we can hold on to a step-by-step that serves us well. So that's what I would advise.
I love that. That's a really quick and easy and simple framework, I think, to follow. So thank you. And you mentioned that of particular interest is how we change our perspective by changing our words. And I think especially on the heels of 2020, that's something we all need. So I'd like to talk about recognition. What are some of the key ways to recognize others that actually inspires? How can we recognize effort? How can we recognize achievement now, even more than ever, on the heels of 2020?
Yeah, it's just so important. It's always been important. The reality is it's always been important to recognize others and to recognize yourself, to build in a daily practice of identifying what you did particularly well. So I'm going to run through a few things here. When I'm coaching, I coach the specificity of one-on-one meetings with your direct reports, and that a key component of that, the very first thing be celebrating any wins. So you can choose words all in different ways. You can say, if you report to me, Linda, I might say, tell me what you're most proud of since we spoke last. Tell me what we have to celebrate since we spoke last. Can you provide a win, personal or professional, that you'd like to share with me? And I'm establishing a positive environment to start with. The walls could be crumbling at your organization, and you still should lead with what is going well, right? So teasing that out. And then that's fodder for the recognition. It's fodder for me to identify, tied to what's of value to you, what there is to recognize, right? So you've told me what you're most proud of, or a win, something to celebrate. And now I can wrap that together and choose words specific to what you're saying, like why was it a win for you? And so I'm going to tie it right to what you value and what's important to you and your contribution. I
love that.
Yeah, and what I want to really encourage everybody to think about is this word contribution. What is your contribution on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis? What is the contribution of those around you? And how can you better celebrate that contribution, so that when you come to recognizing the contribution, you're not just thanks for a good job, you're being very specific about how the X contribution, whatever it is the person does or that you do, and how it serves the values of the organization or the mission of the organization.
Yeah, so smart. I love that. What can we celebrate today? What has happened since last time we met that we can celebrate together? That just completely changes the dynamic of the exchange. I love that. So again, let me ask everyone, if you don't mind coming off mute, what words uplift you? What would you like to hear more of? What do you like hearing when someone actually recognizes you, when they actually lift you up? What really gives you that sense of happiness, joy, fulfillment, reward? Sophie, what about you? We haven't heard from you, and I'd love to hear from you. And you too, Yvonne.
I just unmuted myself to say something.
Great.
What I like to hear is, I never thought about it that way. And when I hear that, that makes me feel like I'm really contributing to the conversation.
Oh, I love that. That is so brilliant. I've never thought of it that way, because what that says is you're opening up perspective and you're opening up
Absolutely.
opportunity and discovery. And gosh, how awesome is that?
Yes. Yep.
And
That's a great thought.
And how wonderful to offer that to someone else, right? To when someone says something to you or reflects something back to you, that you're able to say, gosh, I had never thought about it that way. I mean, that just feels good to open yourself up to more.
Yeah. Sophie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, I definitely second what Yvonne said. That definitely resonates with me. And also just something as simple as saying, like, I love that idea, or that's a great idea for something that you contributed, which is very simple and to the point, but it that actually happened to me earlier today. I sent an email saying something that we're doing, and then they responded, I love that idea. When do you need this by? And it just kind of made me feel good, and that what I'm, like Yvonne said, contributing is being acknowledged and appreciated.
That's so great, Sophie, and right on point too. And I'd love to hear from Heather. You guys don't know Heather, but I do, and she's a phenomenal writer and communicator, and she is just such a gift. I swear, she's one of the most talented communicators I know. So what makes you feel really good, Heather, in the leadership positions that you've been in, overseeing communication departments? What's made you feel really good?
Well, I think, Linda, and you're always so kind, so thank you. But, I got you thinking about in the people that I've led, and I think in giving gratitude is really when you get to know the different people, because if you're fortunate where you're leading maybe a few different people appreciate gratitude in different ways, where some really like the public shout out, where others appreciate the one-to-one. So I think in sharing gratitude is how that person likes it. Do they like the thank you? Do they like the public? And I think if you can be specific on it, and that's what, I've tried to do. And I appreciate that as well, instead of this, you're on a team thing, let's have kudos at the end of the meeting. But when someone, take that moment for the individual email, or if it's Teams message, and the whole idea of today that words matter, just taking that minute or two, because that's what sticks, I think, with people. And in fact, I'll leave this as an idea for the last team I led. When they sent their weekly reports, I always asked them at the end to put one win that they had for the week. So it'd be something, in case I couldn't remember everything, but at the end of a year to have 52 wins, things I could recognize and to look back on as well, and to, show them gratitude for.
Yeah, really, really good practice, I think. Anyone else? Rochelle, what makes you feel great? What words do people use with you that make you feel great?
So I guess my positioning is a little different. I founded an organization that trains women how to run for public office. So, the majority of people, when they hear that, the eyes perk up, the ears brighten up, everything. It's like an automatic positive reaction. So I can't say that I've ever had too much negative interaction on a podcast. So I always get praise. I always get compliments. Oh, we should be doing this. We should have more women run. So for me, it's always mostly positive. So I really don't have anything negative to say, but mostly what people say is, oh, that's great. Yes, we need more women in politics. That's what you're doing is really important to help get more women involved in local, state, and national government. So it's always positive energy that I get. So it's always nice to hear that. So
that's great. And good for you.
Thanks.
So Terre, it sounds like as you shift to regularly using more positive words, of course, you feel better, right? The words that you choose can create happiness. And if you dwell on those words and the conversations around them, it has a really profound impact on your emotional well-being. So what are a few of the strategies for how we manage our internal voice, right? That recording of maybe a critical coworker or parent or something like that, to help us reach our greatest potential, to serve us well and help us reach our greatest potential? How can we manage that internal voice?
Yeah, and that's the trick. That question that you're asking, nailing this is the key, really, very, very truly. So the practice of the pause is step one. So are you pausing and reflecting on a daily basis and multiple times during the day? Are you creating space for you to assess whether or not you're pleased with the narrative that's going on in your head, or it's disruptive to your well-being, basically. I mean, it could be disruptive to your well-being as well as to your ability to lead your team and so on and so forth, or in your relationship. So pausing long enough to assess what choices are being made for that internal narrative, and then changing them up, whether or not you're journaling and you're writing the more assertive, affirmative words out so that you start to repeat them back to yourself, and stopping, like physically stopping when you're hearing the doubt come in. And so that's what changes your sense of self. So it's all about the practicing the pause, whether that's your meditation, whether or not that's just 3 deep breaths before you're entering a conversation. I just used the word just, which I shouldn't have. It's not just 3 breaths, it's 3 important breaths, right? So it's that kind of awareness to say, there's no reason to minimize that. 3 important deep breaths to center myself for my intention going forward. To recap, it's that pause and then coupled with, you pause up front, you have the interaction, or you speak like I'm doing now, and then you couple that with the reflection of what you might choose to do differently.
Yeah, it's great advice. And it sounds so simple and straightforward, but putting it in practice every day is exactly that. It's a practice. But I will say, everyone's ability to create with words is truly a natural wonder. It gives you what you truly want in your life, which is more joy, more happiness, more fulfillment, more possibility. And in your book, you speak about how everyone is empowered to choose words that are true to their values and they're true to their intentions. So can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean, and how can we become aware of that?
Right. So first step, and this is a part of an activity in the book, is that identify your values. You know, everyone, I hope, works in an organization that has values, organizational values. Oftentimes, we don't have personal values. Best case scenario is when my personal values align very well with the company values, with the organizational values. When that's not the case, you're misaligned there with what you're doing on a daily basis. So let's assume your personal values are aligned with the organizational values. Then own them and make them overt and intentional all the time. And I like to say, verb them first. There's a lot on the internet. You can Google about verbing your values, and a lot of tech companies have been verbing their values. So being of service instead of service is a value, right? Speaking with openness and integrity. So now I'm saying communicating with openly and honestly. So instead of saying the value is honesty, you're saying exactly what you're going to do to live that value. So that's step 1. Then start to speak to that. You can speak to that when you're recognizing someone. So now I can say, Linda, I'd very much like to tell you, I'd like to share how much I appreciate when you were being of service last week with that particularly difficult message we had to share with the client or what have you. So I'm constantly tying contribution, values, all of that messaging together, which makes one feel good, and it makes one feel connected to their purpose, right? So take those values and peel them back until you can say, this is the action behind that value. This is what I'm going to do on a daily basis. And then test for it. Test yourself. Are you just speaking the values? Are they just hanging on the wall somewhere? Or are they showing up in your vernacular every day? And that's part of that reflection. End of the day, how often did I overtly weave and intentionally weave my values into conversations with others so that they were aware of my intention and what I show up and own and my participation. So that's how you package it all together.
It's so beautiful. And I just have to say, I am so grateful that I invited you to share some of your insights specific to the idea that we all have our own personal podcast playing in our head, and listening to your strategies for how we manage this internal voice to serve us well and help us reach our greatest potential, I have found incredibly inspiring. And for me, of particular interest is how we can all change our perspective by changing our words, something I think we all need right now, as I said, especially on the heels of 2020. But let me open up and see if there are other comments or other points of view or perspectives from everyone on the call. So if you don't mind unmuting, I see, Ro, that you wrote a note here when you did your TEDx talks on how words can open or close our trust. You call it conversational cocktails. So that's fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the words that we use in a mere 0.007 of a second can either convey that you are a friend or that you are a foe. They're triggers. They trigger us to open up our heart and open up like, oh, I like this person. Or they could trigger you like, like, who is she and why is she saying this? So it's so fast. So it's very, very important what words you use. And one of the things that helps me in conversation is I'm always paying attention to trying to ask a question that I actually don't know the answer to. Not a leading question, not a question that I'm just trying to do chit chat because I really know the answer and I just want to pull something out of you so I can say something else. It's really, I call it, it's a share and discover, a curiosity, that wonder, and then you don't know where the conversation goes and what emerges. So yeah,
I love that. That's really great
and
insight.
by the way, that is from I've been certified and trained in this, but that is from a body of work that I highly, if you love this conversation, and probably Terry knows about it, is conversational intelligence. It's like taking emotional intelligence to the next level. It's by a woman who, may she rest in peace, Judith Glaser, who's an amazing, amazing woman. And she has a book, Conversational Intelligence. So if you just want to read the book on it, you'd get so much information on just that alone. Besides Terry's book.
And I want to see your TED Talk. I'm interested in your TED Talk too. What's the name of the TED Talk?
Conversational Cocktails. I could try to find the link and put it in if you want. It's short. It's only one of those 6-minute TED Talks.
Kim, you've been really quiet, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is there anything that you have realized about words that uplift you, words that send a minimizing or limiting message, or words you hear that serve to maybe undermine a person, a process, an organization? Any thoughts, Kim Bergman?
Well, hello, everyone. I was thinking about this, and even more than the words, it's posture often. And but along the lines of language and words, one of the things that's also important with me, I just had a conversation with someone and they made a point after a meeting. They then called me back and said, what you said really impacted me. And that at those times when I think about what really does affect how I give compliments or how my language comes across, what really did affect me and how can I offer that to you? Because so often there are pearls of wisdom. I've heard them in this conversation. There are such pearls given, and it takes me clearing my mind and being able to listen to what you're saying. I don't know if that's
really smart.
Talking about once again, it's off to the side a little bit, Linda. Oi.
No, Kim, I love that. Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, what about you? Any comments about anything you've heard, words that you hear or say that might say limiting or minimizing, or words that lift you up, words that undermine? Any comments or thoughts you have that you can share?
Yes, but first of all, Terry, I want to let you know that you and I have a friend in common, and she is the one that told me about you. And I listened to your NPR podcast, and she sent me some links. Her name is Fran Jacks, and we went to high school together. We're meeting her next week. Yeah. So anyway, a couple of things is that I love it when people say, "Oh, look at you!" Like, "Wow, that is awesome." And also, "Oh, look what you can do." And it's kind of like, "Yes, I can." And it's just very uplifting, and a whole conversation starts from that, and everybody's energy gets really, really great about that. And the other thing that you had mentioned was about the podcast in your head. And I think right now, with so much emphasis, with a lot of us being in leadership development, coaching, businesses of that nature, we're all, I know for me, the podcast that I have to keep going is one of positivity, because it's so easy to fall into the imposter syndrome. Wow, I haven't written a book. Wow, I'm not a keynote speaker. Wow, I'm not this. Wow, I'm not that. But, I just have to say, you got to use what you got. And I think all of us have a lot that we have to offer. So I just have to keep that podcast going in my head all the time, because it's very competitive out there. And a lot of what's out there, it's from days gone by. You read books, but it's just made to be more relevant to the situation that we have today. So this has been just so empowering, and I've just learned so much. So just want to thank everybody for sharing. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate that. Any other last minute thoughts before we wrap it up?
If I might, well, first of all, Elizabeth, thanks for reminding me that that's how I knew your name. I wanted to piggyback back to what Rose said. You were making me think of something that I talk about, the difference between being interested and interesting, and how important it is to show up being interested, whether it's with your spouse or your colleagues or your direct reports, what have you, right? So how can you be more interested? And you tapped on this a little bit. That's asking really good questions in particular that start with what, how, or a statement that leads with tell me about. When you ask what and how questions, they're open-ended, and you're asking something deeper. Whatever it is that you want to know, there's this little seed of something. Then you say, what impact has doing X had on your life? Like, whatever it is, that little seed that you have, I'm positive that you can craft a what, a how, or a tell me about question. Works wonderfully with children too, so that you get away from the fine, particularly in these COVID days where people are just a little tapped out, one Zoom after another type of thing, asking, what made you laugh today? What was the brightest spot of your day? So what and how? How did you use your gifts specifically today? Anyway, it made me think about that, and I just wanted to weave that in as far as the difference between being interested and interesting, whether it's with your kids or at work or what have you, revolves around asking really good questions and then listening particularly well.
I love that. As all of you can see, Terry Short is an adventurer. She is continually exploring her individual evolutionary journey, and she is a potential developer of human beings. She specializes in leadership development and communication skills, obviously. And with more than 30 years of leadership expertise in healthcare, hospitality, business ownership, Terry has shared with us a wealth of knowledge as an author, a speaker, and as a professionally certified coach. She actually coaches leaders at all levels, from executives to frontline workers in worldwide industries. And she is absolutely passionate about creating individual learning paths, enhance leaders' brilliance, and elevate their contributions. Her company, ShortGroup, provides live and online learning opportunities for both individuals and for groups. And in 2020, she published the book we've talked about, The Words We Choose. And I personally cannot recommend this highly enough. I've read it. It's transformational. And The Words We Choose, your guide to how and why words matter, as I said, was a American BookFest finalist and truly one of the most impactful reads that I've read so far in 2021. So I highly recommend that you check out Terry's book. It's remarkable. And I'm Linda Fisk. I'm the CEO of Leadership Global. And if any of you are interested in joining this incredible, impactful community of women leading in business, politics, and entertainment, it would be my privilege and my honor to be able to connect with you and tell you more about this remarkable community of women just like Terry Short, who are trailblazers, pioneers, innovators, and thought leaders. And I am every single day humbled by the community of women that have joined Leadership Global that I get to learn from every single day. So thank you everyone for joining. I am so grateful that you spent an hour of your day learning from the remarkable Terry Short. Thank you so much, everyone.